Hey gang, it's boy the Turbo Monculus here. Today I'm just making a pretty quick video. By the time you see this video, I'll be on vacation, so I'm just trying to get these videos in ahead of time. We are talking about the three other least played Warframes in the game: Corvex, Dagoth, and Grendel. So I have the stats here. This is the kind of primed combined usage list from 2025. And you'll see that I talked about. I made a video about Banshee already. I'll have a longer video about Limbo. And then everything else from there, like maybe we'll talk about at a later date or maybe with 2026 usage rates. So yeah, we're covering Corvex, Dagoth, and Grendel because some reasons why these frames aren't played are like quite obvious and some aren't so obvious. So like sub, all that garbage. Just this is gonna be the more usual PowerPoint content that you guys have come to expect. So yeah, we're gonna cover Corvex real quickly, talk about Grendel, talk about Dagoth, why these frames are underplayed, why I think you should probably play them, or why you shouldn't play them. It's a real mixed bag with these guys. It's a more complex of a conversation than you might expect, but generally these are all like pretty solid designed warframes, usually with one key flaw that keeps them away from play, or maybe like the grind being kind of for them being kind of funky. But what's noticeable, what's worth noting is besides Grendel, the farm isn't really a huge part of why these frames aren't played, to my understanding. And again, the way these usage rates work, as far as I understand, is that you have to own the frame in order to be considered part of the statistics. If you don't own Corvex, you're obviously not going to end up on the usage rate. These were combined from DE's own internals. So yeah, let's get started. Talk about Corvex. So Corvex, I think a lot of people understand why this term isn't played. I'm pretty sure like a YouTuber got like canceled or some shit over talking negatively about this frame, and I'm not a huge fan of Corvex myself, actually. I've got a huge problem with the way that he plays. I think that and let's get one thing straight: survival is my favorite game mode. Right, that's where I spend a lot of my time, and it's where Corvex does a great job due to that high enemy density. However, it's all he kind of does for the most part, right? Corvex has intense reliability on enemy density in order to like have Crucible Blast do its thing. The Crucible Blast also works in very unobvious ways. You will have to do some reading on the wiki, talk to a Corvex player to really understand. I fully don't, that's why I haven't made a guide on him, obviously. Crucible Blast works in a very strange way in the way its math works, and the reason that it's able to do so much when it has so many enemies to function. Obviously, it does some quadratic stuff as far as I'm understanding, but it does more than that. Like, it is genuinely an impressive ability from a mathematical perspective, but it needs a lot of enemies in order to actually work properly. And if you've ever had teammates before, you know it can be pretty hard to get all of that. And even then, even if you have the game modes and you're alone and you have the enemy density, some maps just stink with this. A lot of game modes stink with this, and it's really hard to enjoy the frame when you can only whip them out in niche scenarios. And my kind of problem is I like to use survival as a testing ground for a lot of my builds. So therefore, Corvex gets no play, just like me in real life. Corvex also has two pretty needed augments, Wrecking Wall being like less needed, I guess, and Fused Crucible, which reduces modding freedom. And modding freedom on Corvex is reduced even further by the fact that he is a range maxing frame. You want to max range on Corvex basically every time, based on my understanding of how the frame works, at least in most cases. And so when you already have, again, generally three mods, your overextended, your auger reach, and your stretch, taken up because again, range is a very like gate kept stat, so you have to run the same exact mods over and over in order to get the max range. That's just how like max range frames work, like Zaku. It's the same stuff over and over. And then you have two augments generally you have to run, so that's 5 of your 8 main mod slots. And now, okay, like, do you see what I mean, right? And some players respond more negatively or more like carelessly, whatever, they don't really care, towards modding freedom restrictions. For me personally, I'm not a big fan. I think modding is where Warframe really shines. And so when you're basically saying that 4 or 5 of my 8 slots need to be taken up by X, Y, or Z, that's not really a positive experience for me. Containment Wall for Corvex is a pretty frustrating ability to operate on a good, like, probably 70% of tile sets. It is not a fun ability to use. It won't grab enemies. If there's any altitude, it kind of freaks out. Even if all the enemies are in front of you on flat ground, it still has pretty limited range and won't always work the way you want it to. Lining up the enemies for Crucible Blast is great. you can't cast it during Crucible Blast. Crucible Blast has an animation that's fairly lengthy. In order to keep recasting, Corvex kind of has to be on the move, which is really weird. Ideally, you'd want to be able to like dash around, but sometimes you just can't do that. Again, if you're playing Corvex properly, I'm gonna say, obviously I'll do a self-report here, that I am not the best Corvex player in the world. I've tried to gather quite a comprehensive understanding of him, and I understand like in the very basics of how he works. It's more why he works that I don't fully understand all the way in terms of like a on like a numerical level. Um, but I don't have to have a degree to understand that using his 2 sucks. It is not fun to do. Additionally, Corvex's 3, Disometric Guard, really doesn't do enough for an ability that like ruins fashion frames. Obviously, that's a way weird complaint to give, but Disometric Guard just being like glorified status immunity when an ability like Spellbind and Ineja's Firewalker, that's Spellbind's from Titania, and then Ineja's Firewalker do the same thing and like more, by the way, right? Like so yeah, Disometric Guard, like doing like being all that, like I'm so really shocked it doesn't give Overguard. Not that Corvex necessarily has survivability issues, although I would also argue again, armor is not a real thing like past a certain level. It's not even like level cap. I'm not a level capper, kind of like larper. Like I like armor drops off before you start worrying about level cap. Like EDA armor becomes less useful, right? So it's a legitimate concern because that's DE's intended content there. And Corvex's survivability is not stellar outside of, again, his main gimmick, which is Crucible Blast, making him invulnerable, which is great. But again, Crucible Blast isn't always working. Corvex has to move around the map a lot. And again, has a lot of like investment needs. And so Disometric Guard not doing enough is a problem for Corvex, in my opinion, and makes him way less fun to play. Because you do just need to sit into Crucible Blast. It's funny because Corvex does have like one of the most underrated passives in the entire game, which is just free 3-meter punch through. Yet playing him outside of his like one fused Crucible gameplay mode is like really not fun to do because of, again, how one-dimensional this frame can feel and how desperate his needs are for that enemy density, and for the way he needs to be invested. And it's very one note, which again, he's made of like, he's a concrete guy. I love this frame's design. Um, Numerically he's kind of complex. Understanding like why you're doing all the damage you're doing in those big environments, and then to have all that damage stripped away from you when there isn't like 2,000 enemies on the screen, can be pretty disappointing, and I think a lot of players can get frustrated by that. So I do think this frame is like deceptively complex on a mathematical level to understand like why you're doing the damage you're doing, because I can admit that even though I understand what Corvex is doing, how he's doing it, like there's a lot for me to like study and understand still. And so like when I do make a guide, I will be going way into depth onto that. Also, Corvex is like kind of ugly for a lot of people. I love his design personally. But I could see why, like, if you're someone who plays like Excalibur and like Ash and like all these like other frames, kind of like edgy type stuff, or you like play with like the girly pop frames, like Corvex just might not be for you, right? And that's totally okay. But I think that it'd be kind of like silly to not acknowledge that Corvex is just like a block of concrete guy, with a tall head, and I could see why somebody might not want to play him, especially like multiplied with the things I just had mentioned earlier. So yeah, that's why I think Corvex is kind of where he is in this graph, second to the bottom. I think that they are mostly like pretty good reasons, actually. This frame is good, but like he has a niche that a lot of other Warframes want to be there. Like I want to play my Saren and my Mirage and my Protea in high enemy density environments, and they're gonna do a kick-ass job too. So it's not like Corvex has some sort of like niche he dominates in the same way like Chroma might. Um, like Profit Taker or whatever. Like Corvex can, the reason, like, how do I explain it? It's like Corvex isn't needed to clear out those big enemies. Those like Corvex needs the enemies. The enemies don't need Corvex as a solution. It's like if you want to play Warframe, you have to go. If you want to play the Warframe, you have to go into those big environments. Otherwise, you're just not going to have very much fun. But in terms of like sound design and abilities and the way he looks, I do love this frame quite a bit. Again, I just think he's super one note. And again, the settings, when I want to go take him out, I want to go take out all 64 other Warframes. So it's just not a very compelling pick for me. And so that's why I see why he's second to the bottom. Grendel. Grendel's a big boy, and not everyone likes that in their video game. I don't really agree with that, but I understand that like if you want to play like the jacked and chiseled, like the Excalibur, like the more normal bot, like whatever, that's bullshit. But if you don't want to be a big boy in a video game, like I'm not gonna harsh your mellow dog if that's what you want. Totally fine. But also like I think Grendel's kind of a creepy design. Like again, like the we'll talk about when we get to Dagoth. Dagoth having like the whole punch through her face is kind of creepy. And I think Grendel basically being like a Warframe probably creeps some people out. So I kind of get that. The one thing for me that Grendel that really bothers me about Grendel is that Grendel doesn't have a satiation mechanic. So when he eats enemies, they just kind of melt to death in his stomach. And that is really, 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 really fucking annoying because you don't get to use the rest of the abilities. It's kind of this problem of where you add another resource, right? Except you've added it on top of energy. It's not like Lavos or Hildren. Like Hildren uses shields, Lavos uses cooldowns, and like then you learn how to manage that. Grendel manages energy barely because he has Nourish, obviously. But he also has to manage enemies in his stomach, and that's just like when you add another resource, you have to make sure it's not frustrating as all hell to manage. And in Grendel's case, it is so infuriating to manage his resources. It's so irritating. He needs some sort of satiation mechanic where he can use Nourish, where he can use Regurgitate reliably, without having to constantly feast and grab new enemies because Overguard is incredibly frustrating to deal with. Um, all of that stuff, all that stuff. There's too little room in the belly of a Warframe who's supposed to eat like planets or some shit. Like it's crazy. It's crazy. It's super frustrating. Other Warframes use Nourish better than him, which is like super annoying. On that note, right, the Grendel farm is a bit intense. To my understanding, it's been a while. It's been a very long time since I've done it. Granted, but when people farm Grendel, they usually end up subsuming him. So that could maybe cause some statistical problems. I don't know. Again, you do have to own the frame for it to end up on this graph here, but I don't know if like the subsuming counts or how that works exactly. Um, but again, he does have he has Prime, so I'm not really sure. But yeah, for Grendel, I think a lot of it is that his mechanics are pretty frustrating to use, and it's like one good change away from being not frustrating to use. I can think some people are unsettled by his design, even though I personally love it. I think it's really great. It's just not what everyone's looking for in a video game, and like I can totally respect that and understand that. Personally, I like the big frames. I think they're cool. I love Foley. I think that it's kind of cool that there's all sorts of different designs. I think if everything looked like Ash, Excalibur, whatever, like it would be a pretty stale game for me. Um, but that's all. That's really it. Like, I really think that if Grendel had a proper satiation mechanic, and was able to use the bodies he ate properly, this would probably be like not quite off my screen here because like there's times like Cyto 9. Like, I guess he had less players like would I don't know where he would be, but it would definitely be higher than this, right? And it's really frustrating because I do think it's a pretty simple ad. I don't think that Grendel would be like broken if he could spam regurgitate a little more, right? It's just super annoying that like in order to use an ability that is like half as strong as a lot of the meta frames, he has to have this additional resource, which ends up like again, I'm cool with frames having like additional layers to their gameplay. I think that's cool. I think that's good. I think having like restrictions built in to gatekeep strength, whether that's in terms of like mechanical, like using your keyboard or controller properly and executing the frame properly, having that kind of restriction, or like a build restriction, an investment restriction. Like I'm cool with those things, but Grendel is a frame who's like, hey, pretty good, but then also has restrictions. It's not like he's broken or something, right? The frame's generally good and is absolutely playable. You know, he's got a lot of good stuff going on, but ultimately, like playing his kit is so annoying. And then if you want to use him as a weapon platform, go play a different frame. Um, I personally, again, I play him with Regurgitate and its augment. I believe that that's just kind of the best way to play him. If you want to actually play Grendel, otherwise, like if you're gonna just go use Nourish, go use it on like a different frame. But generally, I think this frame suffers a lot from his farm, his design. Players just don't want to play, which is a shame because I think Randall's pretty cool. Um, and also again, he's got like it's just his kit's frustrating to play, man. Like micromanagement is first of all, Warframe players are already kind of against, like at least to my understanding, they're very against like micromanagement and dealing with like weird little mechanics. And so when they're poorly done like this, it's even more frustrating to the average player. The Goth. Dagoth is by far like the most interesting entry on this list for me. I have some theories because I really do think this frame's actually quite good, especially with her build, the build that I've been running with Spectral Spirit. Again, Spectral Spirit's a part of the reason I think she's kind of left down here in an uninteresting spot as well. I think her farm's fairly easy. I think her design is actually she has one of the better base designs in the game. Again, I understand the whole face, punch through her face can like creep some people out. I get that. My personal theory is that she's a very powerful but uninteresting Warframe. Doom as a mechanic is really, 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 really cool outside of Warframe. Damage has just power crept, and again, I've accepted power creep as a concept. I get it. I understand. It has power crept so out of control that a mechanic that basically creates an execution type of deal, based on how much damage the enemy is taking, is just not noticeable, firstly, really, in a lot of cases, nor would it be needed. It's like, oh, you want some damage with your damage? Like, yeah, that's cool, but I'd rather just get that damage either like through a damage buff, which again, Dagoth does do that, right? You're able to run the augment, and that gives you that critical damage multiplier, which is really, really strong. You can combine that with like Wrathful Advance and a melee build. You can combine it with a lot of different things. I use like the Kuvanu core. You can amplify the Goth is a strong Warframe in my opinion. This is a good Warframe. But the problem is Doom is just an uninteresting mechanic inside of Warframe. Power creep has gotten too high, damage has gotten too high, and you can't really see Doom do anything, right? Even when you go off of first of all, casting Doom itself. This is assuming you're using the augment. So you're not using the augment. You have to cast Doom over and over. That's cringe. You can use Weird Scythes to spread it. Still not as good as what Spectral Spirit does, the augment. It feels kind of mandatory, and like also with Spectral Spirit, personally, this is something I love about Dagoth, but Warframe players aren't always like this. I love that I have to get this cooldown of Spectral Spirit back, right? The way that I do it personally is I keep like the Miter Incarnon or like a really strong weapon, Incarnon charged, like as a sidearm, essentially, and I'll use like my usual course of play weapon, and as my Spectral Spirit comes down, I will pull that weapon out, release it into the wild, and get my Spectral Spirit cooldown back right away. Shield gating with Weird Scythes. In the meantime, until I get the Spectral Spirit back, I use like Arcane Concentration, Heavy Duration, and I believe like a 30-second Spectral Spirit, and you're basically like part-time Revenant, right? And that's like, in my opinion, part-time Revenant is way more fun than Revenant. Long story on that, but Weird Scythes is just boring. Cavalry is slow and unreliable, even though again I think it's quite a good ability. It's just, again, it is slow and unreliable. Like not like Wrecking Ball bad in my opinion, but the horses can be a little bit annoying. And the Goth also to me sometimes feels a little bit off theme. Like again, the horses are cool, the Doom is cool, but like, what am I actually doing besides weapon platforming when I play this frame? Because if I've meant to cast horses over and over, I'm gonna give myself arthritis on a slow ass ability, and that's not very fun to me. Um, to me, if you're playing her as that kind of weapons platform, you're able to have a lot of fun, and she's able to be quite strong. But there is a lack of identity feeling there, and I'm not a huge fan of that. So Dagoth is definitely one that is pretty surprising to me. Again, her farm, it doesn't seem too hard. I was speedrunning, it was really fun for me. Um, but to me, it's a short list of like pretty key things that make her feel pretty uninteresting to play, and pretty uninteresting to like use as like clickbait for like content creators. Maybe when she gets a prime, that would be my guess, is that people will be like, oh my god, they got this so broken. She is quite good. But I think she's boring. I think she's pretty uninteresting. And her core mechanic being Doom is one that doesn't work very well in Warframe. So solutions, just real quick. Corvex should probably remain the same, I think. Corvex led to the cancellation of a content creator. I'm not willing to take that risk. I think that for me, Corvex is changing Corvex to balance him out to be better in his less niche scenarios, like outside of his niche, and then maybe like nerfing him in his niche, which would feel really weird. Messing with that power fantasy of what Corvex currently provides sounds like an awful idea. I think Corvex players very much like what their frame does, even if it is inside of like only one scenario. That one scenario is still popular enough and occurs enough to be kind of insane and fun and really, really cool. So if you were to change Corvex, it would likely have to be just a straight up buff as opposed to an adjustment, which I think he could use an adjustment, but I think a buff would have to happen. I don't think taking away his niche is a very good idea. And I think that's something that DE might be tempted to do if he were to get some sort of rework, because um, I mean, yeah, that's actually really it. Just his niche is really fun, and Corvex players are cultists, and I am not willing to mess with you guys. For Grendel, it is just the satiation mechanic, right? You add this essentially like limiter to Grendel, who is already not super strong. Again, I think Grendel is fairly good. But he's not like broken or anything. It's not like Grendel would be so broken if he could spam 4. He actually kind of okay, he would be pretty nuts, but like no different than like some of the current meta frames and how strong they are, right? I know meta is an annoying word, but like whatever. It's just strong frames is what I'm talking about. Grendel with a satiation mechanic would be like a 10 times more enjoyable Warframe, and right now he just kind of feels like you're being slowed down all the time. The Goth is pretty fine. I think, like to me, a visual clarity indicator on like enemy health bars to see what Doom is doing would be pretty cool. Maybe like enemies killed by Doom. You could do some AoE stuff. I just think that damage calculations are pretty messy. Like I run Roar with my Dagoth, and so like it's what Doom does and doesn't take into consideration for its execution math is just sloppy, um, and annoying to deal with. So I'm not really sure what I do with Dagoth. Um, I don't know what DE intended when they made her, so I can't say for sure the direction that should be taken, because again, I don't think her design is bad at all. It's just like the way it's not fitting. I don't anticipate her getting any sort of like reworks or buffs or anything. I think this frame is fine and quite strong, but just like generally pretty uninteresting, which is a shame. And yeah, that's basically it. I just want to talk about these three. Again, I'm gonna be on vacation by the time you guys see this. I love you guys so much. Thank you for the opportunity to make these videos for you. Next video should be on the second ability. It'll be the second ability, Warframe Tier Slop. Just another time to make it before I left. And yeah, that's really it. Hype, sub, like, all that garbage. And I will catch you on the flip. Much love to you guys always. And bye-bye.